So I've been getting a ton of comments about the new Final Fantasy VII Remake trailer. A lot of people are asking about my opinions on it, but I just didn't really feel right making an entire video about it. I didn't want to have to make you guys sit through YouTube ads just to listen to pretty good. Now, don't get me wrong, little bite-sized news videos about the upcoming video game releases are always great here on YouTube. I watch them all the time to see what's going on with my favorite series, but I just don't feel like that's what this channel is all about. You guys come here for in-depth looks at your favorite video game characters, or entire playthroughs of certain games, or even in-depth conversations about video game lore. So I just didn't feel right making a little tiny video about a trailer in which I really didn't have too much opinion about other than pretty good. Now, what I would like to talk a little bit about today is just the history of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Everyone's opinions are running high, but I think we all need to step back and just look at how we got here. So come back in time with me to an ancient year known as 2000. In the early 2000s, Square talked about potentially remaking Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and IX for the PlayStation 2. They quickly realized that recreating the vast worlds of the PS1 games on the PS2 console would be way too difficult and would cause them to have to cut a lot of pre-existing content. So instead of doing that, they created 2 sequels to Final Fantasy XIII instead. Then, during the creation of the PlayStation 3, Square decided to make a tech demo at E3 2005 using the Final Fantasy VII characters in order to show off their new Crystal Tools engine. This sparked the fans' interest in the Final Fantasy VII Remake again, but they were shortly shot down as Square said the same exact thing they said before. It'd be way too difficult to create on the PlayStation 3's new cutting-edge system, and they'd have to cut a lot of corners if they were to make it work. At that point, hype started to die down a bit, as fans figured they would never really make a Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it was something that they would just continue to tease forever. As the years went on, things would pop up here and there, but nothing super substantial until the year 2014. In 2014, especially in the movie industry, it seemed like remakes and remasters and reimaginings were at an all-time high. In addition, games like Child of Light showed that the active time battle mechanic was still popular with fans, and it seemed like the perfect time for the Final Fantasy VII Remake to become a reality. However, fans at the time were very frustrated with Square Enix and their ability to finish games. Kingdom Hearts 3 was still in production after many years of stringing along fans. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Square finally announced the Final Fantasy VII Remake officially at E3 2015. Fans and critics alike were completely stunned. Square completely destroyed E3 that year, and everyone was so excited to see the remake officially being announced. Some of us even thought that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was the reason that Kingdom Hearts 3 was taking too long, and both games would potentially be released within the next year. Unfortunately, it became apparent very quickly that they were just announcing the fact they were making the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Kingdom Hearts 3 was still going to be their main focus until completion. They weren't even going to start the remake yet. They did, however, show some gameplay and cutscenes at the 2015 PlayStation Experience to give everyone an idea of what it was going to look like. This leads us to what I'd like to call the Dark Ages, probably the biggest mistake Square Enix has ever made with Final Fantasy VII. They gave us 3 years, 2016, 2017, and 2018, with almost no footage at all of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. All of the fans who were super excited to see the trailer in 2015 slowly dropped down a hill of madness as they realized that Square might not really be making the game that they want to see. Now, some fans held on to hope. Some fans figured that Kingdom Hearts 3 was just taking too much time because of Disney, and once it was finally completed, they would jump onto the Final Fantasy VII Remake and create the dream game that we all wanted. But in my experience, being one of the few Final Fantasy VII content creators during those years, it seemed like nothing but negative space. I would get loads and loads of comments of people berating Square for taking too long, not creating the correct game, not creating what they dreamed of since the early 2000s, and just hating the whole idea of Final Fantasy VII being remade in the first place. I would read pages and pages of forum posts of people asking for specific scenes to be in the remake, specific characters, specific lines, and if they didn't have this whole laundry list of things that needed to be in the remake, they wouldn't even buy it. As the years went on and Square didn't show anything about the remake, fans just got more and more aggravated until it seemed like the Final Fantasy VII Remake was just a joke. Now, there were a few things that came out about the remake during the Dark Ages, but almost all of it was met with complete criticism and anger from the fans. Probably the biggest bombshell of all came in 2017 when Square announced that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was not going to be turn-based. Now, depending on your opinion, this might not have mattered to you at all. Some people knew that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was going to be very different from the original, and they didn't mind Square taking extra steps to make it fit in with current games. But that's not really the point. The point is, this was a turning point in the fans' reaction to the remake. Some fans still held on to this idea that the remake was going to be a carbon copy of the original game with great graphics. And when this news finally hit, it kind of started turning the cogs in people's heads as they realized, oh, this isn't going to just be Final Fantasy VII, this is going to be a whole new experience. And a lot of fans did not want that. More fuel for the fire came when Square announced that they wanted to make the remake better than the original game. Now, this isn't overly uncommon for a developer to say. You always want to shoot for the stars and try to make the best game you possibly can, but it angered fans because it seemed like they were trying to make a new Final Fantasy VII game that would completely overwrite the original game and be just a better experience overall, instead of one that would actually work with the original game to create one great series. Fans hoped that the remake would complement the original experience, not replace it. Finally, on January 25th, 2019, Kingdom Hearts 3 released, with no Final Fantasy characters in it. Fans were pretty perplexed by this and wondered if it had anything to do with the remake, or maybe Disney didn't allow the characters to be in there, but regardless, they were hopeful that Square would finally put all of their efforts into the remake. And sure enough, at PlayStation's State of Play 2019, they finally showed off more footage of the remake, and it was incredible. It seemed like Square finally had a handle on what the fans wanted, but they needed to see more. Most of it was just basic stuff at the beginning of Midgar, and they didn't really go into depth and show any of the key scenes that people wanted to see. The combat did look great though, and fans were hopeful that this would be a successful remake, whether or not it actually did complement the old game well. Strangely, the release date of March 3rd, 2020 was announced not at the State of Play or E3, but at an orchestra concert in Los Angeles. However, at E3 2019, Square finally showed a ton of info about the remake, a lot more scenes, a lot more in-depth look at the combat, and fans were very, very happy with what they saw. Probably the biggest bombshell that was dropped during the E3 conference in 2019 was that the game was only going to be Midgar, and multiple games would most likely be produced afterwards to complete the rest of the story. This announcement was met with a very mixed opinion. Some fans thought it was great that they got an entire game full of Midgar, and that they were going to get even more content down the road. Other fans thought that it was ridiculous to think that after so many years they were only going to get Midgar, and that they'd have to pay upwards of $200+ to buy every game in the series in order to finally finish the story. In addition to that, Square announced a $330 version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which didn't sit well with some fans given that this was only Midgar. The reaction in general was very positive though. Everyone liked what they saw, and although they still didn't show a lot of key scenes that fans were looking forward to, they thought that overall the game looked great and they were very excited to get their hands on it. And get their hands on it they did, as astoundingly Square actually had a playable demo at E3 2019, which was met with great reviews. This was the turning point for a lot of fans, including myself. I was stuck in the Dark Ages for a long time. I hadn't really enjoyed a lot of the games that Square had made in the past couple of years, and I was at the point where I was just joking about the remake, figuring it would never come out, figuring that if it did come out, it wouldn't be a successful successor to the original game. I was very negative when it came to the remake, to be honest. However, at this point, it started to become clear to me that Square wasn't trying to replace the original game, but they weren't trying to make an exact copy of it either. Square Enix was attempting to give us a Final Fantasy VII experience that was new and fresh. Much like Advent Children, they weren't necessarily trying to be 100% congruent with the original product, but they were trying to give us a new experience, being able to play Final Fantasy VII again as if we had never played it before. At a time, I thought that Square Enix was trying to just pull us along to get us to purchase this game, whether or not it was good or bad, just specifically because it was Final Fantasy VII, trying to show us just enough to get us interested, but not show us enough to get us to realize it wasn't the game that we wanted. However, at E3 2019, the fact that they gave a playable demo to show, yes, it's not turn-based, yes, it is a lot different than the original, but you're still gonna like it, really showed me what their actual goal with this game was. So at that point, I was finally on board. Sure, there were things that I wasn't going to like about the remake. Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time. I've spent thousands of hours inside even the code of Final Fantasy VII. When the remake comes out, there's going to be things that bother me, sure. But at the end of the day, I finally got the feeling that it was a game that I could enjoy, both myself and with the community that I had created. The experience of the game coming out and showing it off and playing it with my friends, that was going to be priceless. In my experience, it seems like this was the turning point for a lot of other fans as well, but there were people that were still opposing. There were people that jumped off the ship when they realized it wasn't turn-based. There were people that jumped off the ship when they realized it was going to be more than one episode. And those people seemed to be completely against the remake forever, which is fine. That image of a perfect Final Fantasy VII game that has all of the things of the original game, but looks a lot better, is still in the hearts and minds of many. I just don't think that's anything we're ever going to see. The Steam version of the game is the closest we're ever going to get, and I'm personally okay with that. Finally, this leads us to the trailer that just came out recently at the Tokyo Game Show 2019. If there was ever a trailer to put me on the Final Fantasy VII Remake hype train, it was this one. It finally showed almost all of the key scenes that I personally wanted to see to know that Square truly cared about the core and heart of Final Fantasy VII. They do seem to be taking a lot of liberties with the story, even adding specific characters and scenes that were definitely not in the original, but the heart and soul of the game seems to still be there, and the stuff that's important to the fans, they're making sure to include. We can't be sure until the game comes out, but I can say that this seems to be the game that the most fans want, which is really the best that Square Enix can do. The only specific bad news to be released is that the game has been pushed back from March 3rd to April 10th, which usually is no big deal for a game company to push back a game only a month. It certainly gives them a little bit extra time to polish up the game, and most fans will be happy about that. But given the amount of time that we've already waited, a lot of fans were pretty angry at that. Also, pushing back only a month is kind of awkward. Most people like to ask off of work for big release days, and it's hard to ask off work for March and then take it back and ask off for April because they're so close together. So I have to imagine that screwed up a lot of people's schedules. I almost wish they had pushed it back 2 months, but regardless, a lot of people are okay with that change. But some people were very upset about it. Overall, I think Square has made a lot of mistakes down the road, but to them, it seems like the journey is going to be worth the destination. We'll have to see when the game comes out. For a lot of people, they're still very negative towards the release. Other people are very positive. For me, I don't think it's really necessarily important if the game is good or bad. I'm just in it for the experience. I am so excited to experience the game with all of you, with my community, with the whole Final Fantasy VII community. I just want to see Final Fantasy VII again, experience it, enjoy the storylines, enjoy the characters. It's just going to be a blast. You know, I've played a lot of bad games on my stream, and I've played a lot of good games as well, and a lot of times, the bad games are more fun than the good games. I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be a good game, though. I think it's going to be fun. I think that the stories are going to give us a lot of nostalgia, even if they're not perfectly correct. And once I split in my head the original Final Fantasy VII lore with the new Final Fantasy VII lore, I started to get really excited. Before, I was always negative, thinking like, oh, I'm going to have to get out all my Final Fantasy VII books and look through and see if they're getting everything right. But now in my head, I've kind of just split it into old Final Fantasy VII and new Final Fantasy VII. And now that I've done that, I'm excited to see what they come up with, what kind of things they change. Maybe there's some lore stuff that it's better that they changed it. So I'm excited to have both of them, you know, look back on what they did before and look at what they want to do in the future. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. And, you know, pretty good.